The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched before Ambassador Zethkar like a cathedral of power and politics. Thousands of representatives from hundreds of worlds filled the tiered seats, their varied forms creating a living tapestry of galactic civilization. The air hummed with translation fields and the soft murmur of a dozen different respiratory systems, all synchronized in the delicate dance of interstellar diplomacy. Zethkar stood at the center podium, his forearms clasped behind his back in the traditional posture of the Kithari diplomatic corps. His reputation preceded him. In his 3 centuries of service, he had successfully negotiated the peaceful integration of 47 primitive worlds into the Council's sphere of influence. Not one had required military intervention. Not one had resisted once they understood the benefits of joining galactic civilization. "Honorable Ambassador," came the melodious voice of High Counselor Droneth, her crystalline form catching and refracting the chamber's light into dancing rainbows. "We have reviewed your previous successes and find them most impressive. The primitive species you have guided into our fold have all proven valuable additions to our collective strength." Around the chamber, approval hummed in various frequencies and tones. The hulking Vortak representatives grunted their satisfaction, while the ethereal Silmari chimed like distant bells. Even the notoriously difficult Quintar delegation clicked their mandibles in what passed for applause among their kind. Zethkar inclined his head respectfully. "I serve at the pleasure of the Council, High Counselor. These primitive worlds require only proper guidance to see the wisdom of joining our great alliance. Most are quite reasonable once they understand the alternative. The alternative." It hung unspoken in the air, but every being in the chamber understood. Those who refused the Council's generous offer of membership faced the full might of the Galactic Defense Force. In the Council's 15,000-year history, no primitive world had long survived such resistance. It was not cruelty, Zethkar had always believed, but simple practicality. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, and primitive civilizations needed protection whether they realized it or not. Indeed, High Counselor Draneth continued, her voice taking on the formal tone that indicated official business. "Which brings us to your next assignment, a world designated as Terra by its inhabitants, though our survey teams refer to it as Sol 3, the 3rd planet in a small system on the outer edge of what they call the Orion Arm." A holographic display materialized above the chamber, showing a blue-green world spinning slowly in the void. Zethkar studied it with professional interest. It looked pleasant enough. Substantial water reserves, a single large moon, continents that suggested reasonable geological stability, the sort of world that typically produced compliant, grateful new council members. "The preliminary survey was conducted 6 of their solar cycles ago," continued the High Counselor. "Standard passive observation protocols. The dominant species calls itself human and has recently developed primitive nuclear technology. They show the typical signs of a species approaching technological adolescence: tribal warfare, resource competition, and the usual growing pains of a civilization learning to harness atomic forces." More displays appeared around the original planet image. Zethkar saw cities primitive by galactic standards but showing impressive organization for such an early-stage civilization. He noted their transportation networks, their communication arrays, their manufacturing centers, all exactly what he would expect from a species just beginning to reach beyond their home world. "Population approximately 8 billion individuals," the briefing continued. "They have achieved limited space flight, chemical propulsion only, barely capable of reaching their system's 4th planet. No faster-than-light capability detected. No exotic matter manipulation. No quantum consciousness interface technology. By all measurements, a textbook case for standard integration protocols." Zethkar nodded thoughtfully. "Have they detected our survey activities, High Counselor?" "Negative. The observation posts were maintained at appropriate distances, and our stealth technology remains far beyond their detection capabilities. As far as the humans know, they are alone in their little corner of space. Perfect conditions for first contact." The chamber fell silent, except for the ever-present hum of life support systems and translation fields. This was always the moment that defined a civilization's future. The decision of how they would be approached, what level of intervention would be required, what their ultimate fate would be, within the galactic community. "Your orders, Ambassador," High Counselor Draneth said, her crystalline form brightening with official authority, "are to make contact with this human civilization and guide them toward voluntary integration into the Council. Standard protocols apply, demonstrate our technological superiority, explain the benefits of membership, and present the consequences of refusal." Given your exceptional track record, we anticipate a swift and successful conclusion to these negotiations. How long do I have, High Counselor? Zethkar asked, already mentally preparing for the mission. 3 days was usually sufficient for primitive worlds, a week at the most, if they prove particularly stubborn. Take whatever time you require, Ambassador. However, the Defense Force has been placed on standby should your negotiations prove unsuccessful. Fleet Admiral Kexthor is quite eager to field test the new planet cracker weapons his engineers have developed. I trust such measures will prove unnecessary. Around the chamber, the various species representatives made their noises of agreement. The threat was clear and had never failed before. Primitive civilizations always chose survival over pride when presented with the choice clearly enough. Zethkar bowed formally. I understand, High Counselor. I will depart immediately and establish contact with the human leadership. Based on the preliminary data, I expect to return within 10 of their solar rotations with news of their acceptance. Excellent. The Council looks forward to welcoming another primitive world into our protective embrace. High Counselor Dreneth's form dimmed slightly as she settled back into her seat. Transport to the Sol system has been arranged. Your ship awaits. As Zethkar made his way from the Great Chamber, he felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and professional pride that came with each new assignment. The humans would resist at first, of course. They always did. Primitive species rarely understood the galaxy's true nature until it was explained to them properly. They would posture and threaten with their crude nuclear weapons, make speeches about independence and self-determination, perhaps even attempt some futile military response. But they would come around. They always did. Once they saw a demonstration of true galactic technology, once they understood the vast scope of the universe beyond their little blue world, once they realized that the choice was between joining the Council as junior partners or facing annihilation as an obstacle to galactic peace. The transport ship Harbinger was a sleek vessel designed specifically for diplomatic missions to primitive worlds. Its stealth systems could render it invisible to any technology short of quantum-level sensors, while its defensive capabilities could withstand anything a pre-spaceflight civilization might throw at it. More importantly, it carried demonstration modules that could showcase galactic technology in ways that primitive minds could comprehend. As Zethkar settled into his private quarters and reviewed the mission files one final time, he found himself wondering what these humans would be like. Would they be proud warriors like the Vortak had been, requiring a show of superior force before they would submit? Would they be calculating merchants like the Xerilians, needing to see the economic benefits before agreeing to terms? Or would they be simple tribal creatures like the Pelmari, grateful for guidance once their fear was overcome? The ship engaged its quantum drive, and space folded around them like origami made of starlight. Sol, 3 lay 17 days away at maximum velocity. 17 days to review the cultural files, study the human languages, and prepare for what would undoubtedly be another routine expansion of the Council's benevolent influence. Ambassador Zethkar had no way of knowing that in 17 days, everything he believed about power, civilization, and the nature of intelligence itself would be turned inside out and left shattered on the floor of a small blue world that had never heard of the Galactic Council. He had no way of knowing that he was about to encounter something the galaxy had never seen before and would never see again. He had no way of knowing that he was about to meet humanity. The Harbinger dropped out of quantum space at the edge of the Sol system with barely a ripple in the fabric of reality. Ambassador Zethkar stood in the observation deck, watching the small yellow star grow larger as they approached the third planet. His diplomatic staff bustled around him, making final preparations for what should be a routine first contact scenario. Passive scans confirmed the initial survey data, Ambassador, reported his aide, Sub-Ambassador Velnash. 1 dominant species, multiple tribal groups, primitive technology. Their most advanced weapons appeared to be fusion-based explosive devices. No space-based defenses detected. Zethkar nodded, still studying the approaching world. From this distance, it looked remarkably peaceful. The blue of vast oceans, the white swirl of weather systems, the brown and green patches of continents. No orbital defense platforms, no military stations, no signs of the industrial scarring that usually marked a world preparing for interstellar conflict. Communications arrays, he asked. Primitive radio and what appears to be some form of digital network. Nothing that could reach beyond their own system, and certainly nothing encrypted beyond our standard translation protocols. We should be able to monitor their communications and establish direct contact whenever you choose. Through the vast viewing port, Zethkar could see the planet growing larger. Soon he would be able to make out individual continents, then cities, then the tiny lights that marked human civilization. It always fascinated him. This moment when an entire world's future hung in the balance of decisions they didn't even know they were about to make. "Take us to standard diplomatic distance," he ordered. "1 light minute from the planet, full stealth engagement. Begin communication monitoring. I want to understand how they think before we announce our presence." The ship settled into a stable orbit, its advanced sensors reaching out to caress the electromagnetic spectrum emanating from Earth. Within minutes, Zethkar's communication specialists had broken the encryption on every human signal from military radio to civilian internet traffic. The translation matrix hummed as it processed thousands of languages, finding patterns and building linguistic bridges. Ambassador called communication specialist Death Iron from his station. "The humans are unusual." "How so?" "Their global communication network contains approximately 47 billion discrete data packages transmitted daily. Most primitive species manage perhaps a few million at this stage of development." Zethkar frowned. "Population density variations?" "No, sir. Per capita communication is nearly 50 times higher than the baseline for pre-spaceflight civilizations. They appear to be in constant contact with each other across vast distances." Additionally, Thyron paused, manipulating his displays. "Their entertainment media is particularly strange." "Show me." The main display flickered to life, showing what appeared to be humans in various scenarios. Zethkar watched with growing confusion as the images cycled through programs that seemed to consist entirely of humans competing with each other, humans facing impossible odds, humans fighting various threats, both real and imaginary. "This appears to be fictional media," Death Iron explained. "Stories they tell each other for amusement." "But, Ambassador, nearly 70% of their entertainment involves scenarios of conflict, survival, and overcoming superior forces. They seem to find the concept of fighting overwhelming odds enjoyable, curious." Zethkar made a note in his mission log. "Aggressive tendencies are not uncommon in primitive species. We can work with that. What about their governmental structures?" "That's where it gets more complicated, sir. They don't have a single governmental structure. The planet is divided into nearly 200 independent political entities, many of which appear to be in constant competition or outright conflict with each other. This was unusual, but not unprecedented. Tribal fragmentation. We'll need to identify the dominant leaders and work through them. Who controls the largest military forces?" "That's just it, Ambassador. There doesn't seem to be a clear dominant tribe. Several possess weapons capable of destroying their entire civilization, but none has achieved supremacy over the others. They've somehow reached a stable state of mutually assured destruction, without unifying under a single leadership structure." Zethkar's four eyes narrowed as he processed this information. In his 3 centuries of diplomatic experience, he had never encountered a species that had developed planet-killing weapons without also developing the centralized authority to control them. It suggested either remarkable restraint or remarkable stupidity. "Begin detailed monitoring of their military communications," he ordered. "I need to understand their command structures before we make contact. Also, compile a cultural database. What do they value? What motivates them? What are they afraid of?" For 3 days, the Harbinger hung invisible in space while Zethkar's team built a comprehensive picture of human civilization. What they found defied every model the Galactic Council used for understanding primitive species. The humans had indeed developed nuclear weapons, but rather than using them to achieve global dominance, they had somehow convinced each other not to use them at all. They had turned their weapons into tools of peace through the simple expedient of making war too terrible to contemplate. Their scientific advancement was accelerating at a rate that should have been impossible for a species without galactic guidance. They had mapped their own genetic code, begun manipulating matter at the molecular level, and developed computational systems that approached quantum-level processing using purely classical mechanics. Most strangely, their global communication network seemed to be used primarily for sharing information, entertainment, and what could only be described as jokes. Zethkar spent hours watching humans communicate with each other through their primitive internet, watching them help strangers, share knowledge freely, and create elaborate collaborative projects involving millions of individuals. "Ambassador?" Velnash approached with a datapad. "I've completed the cultural analysis. The results are perplexing." "Explain." "According to our psychological models, humans should be fragmented, paranoid, and aggressive. They possess nuclear weapons, limited resources, and competing tribal structures. Every previous species we've encountered with this combination has either destroyed itself or unified through conquest. But they seem to be doing neither. They compete with each other constantly, but it's structured competition with elaborate rule systems. They call them sports and games and contests. They argue endlessly about how to organize their societies, but they've somehow convinced each other that argument itself is valuable. They call it democracy and debate and free speech. Zefkar studied the data streaming across his displays. Hours of human broadcasts, millions of their communications, thousands of examples of their art and literature. The patterns were unlike anything in the Council's xenological databases. What about their response to external threats? He asked. How do they react when faced with superior forces? Velnash's expression grew troubled. That's perhaps the most unusual aspect, Ambassador. Their entertainment media suggests they find the concept of facing impossible odds inspiring. There are thousands of stories about small groups of humans defeating vastly superior enemies through what they call ingenuity, determination, and refusal to give up. Fiction, certainly. Yes, but, Ambassador, fiction often reflects a species' deepest beliefs about themselves, and their historical records support these themes. They have documented cases of small human forces defeating much larger ones through superior tactics, technology adaptation, and what can only be described as sheer stubborn refusal to acknowledge when they should logically surrender. Zefkar considered this information carefully. Every species had myths about heroes overcoming odds, but most were clearly fantasy. If humans actually believed such things were possible, it might complicate the normal diplomatic approach. Recommendations? Standard protocols should work, Ambassador. Despite their unusual psychology, they're still a primitive species with chemical rockets and crude fusion weapons. A demonstration of our technological superiority should convince them that resistance is futile, just as it has with every other world. Zefkar nodded slowly. The plan was sound. Reveal the ship, demonstrate advanced technology, make contact with their leaders, explain the benefits of joining the Council, and present the alternative. Simple and effective. Very well. Prepare for first contact. Disengage stealth systems and establish a standard diplomatic orbit. Signal their largest governmental entities that we wish to communicate. Use the standard format. Identify ourselves as representatives of galactic civilization, emphasize our peaceful intentions, and request a meeting with their leadership. Yes, Ambassador. Initiating first contact protocols. The Harbinger shimmered into visibility above Earth, like a silver needle catching sunlight. 2 kilometers of sleek alien metal suddenly existed, where empty space had been moments before. Across the planet, primitive radar systems screamed alerts. Military bases went to high alert. Emergency broadcasts began flooding their communication networks. Within hours, responses came from every major government on Earth. Some were frightened, some were excited, some were suspicious, but all wanted to know the same thing. What did the visitors want? Zefkar stood in the ship's communication center, watching the flood of human responses pour across his screens. This was the moment that always fascinated him, the first glimpse a primitive species got of the larger universe. Soon, human leaders would be aboard his ship, seeing wonders they could never have imagined, understanding their place in galactic civilization. Ambassador, Death Iron called from his station, we're receiving a response from the dominant governmental body in the northern continent. They're requesting a face-to-face meeting with their leadership. Standard diplomatic protocols. Excellent. Inform them that I will meet with their representatives tomorrow at their capital city. Prepare the shuttle and the standard demonstration equipment. As the Harbinger settled into its diplomatic routine, Zefkar felt the familiar confidence of a mission proceeding exactly as planned. Tomorrow, he would meet with human leaders, show them the wonders of galactic civilization, and begin the process of integrating Earth into the Council. He had no way of knowing that the humans had spent the last several hours not panicking about the alien ship above their world, but arguing with each other about who got to meet the aliens first. He had no way of knowing that they were already adapting their plans, mobilizing their resources, and preparing for possibilities he couldn't imagine. He had no way of knowing that when he met with humanity's representatives, he wouldn't be speaking to fearful primitives begging for protection, but to the kind of species that had looked at an impossible universe and decided to make their own rules about what was possible. He was about to discover that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons or their numbers. It was the fact that they had never learned to quit. The shuttle bay of the Harbinger opened like a flower blooming in reverse, revealing the stark beauty of Earth suspended below. Ambassador Zefkar stood at the threshold, adjusting the translation device at his throat and reviewing his mental checklist one final time. Behind him, carefully selected demonstration equipment hummed with the quiet confidence of technology so advanced it seemed like magic to primitive worlds. The diplomatic shuttle was a work of art in itself, its hull flowing with energy patterns that suggested movement even when perfectly still. As it descended through Earth's atmosphere, Zethkar watched the human cities grow larger through the transparent aluminum viewing ports. Their architecture was more impressive than the initial surveys had suggested. Towering structures that spoke of engineering ambition, transportation networks that pulsed with coordinated movement, industrial complexes that suggested a species comfortable with large-scale organization. "Landing zone acquired, Ambassador," reported the pilot. "The humans have designated a location adjacent to their primary governmental complex. Military presence is heavy, but maintaining a respectful distance." Through the shuttle's sensors, Zethkar could see the landing area they had prepared. It was larger than necessary, surrounded by what appeared to be both military personnel and civilian observers. He noted the organized nature of their response. No panic, no chaos. Just efficient preparation for an event they had never experienced before. The shuttle touched down with barely a whisper, its advanced dampeners absorbing every trace of impact. As the exit ramp extended, Zethkar straightened his formal diplomatic robes and activated the personal force field that would protect him from any primitive weapons the humans might possess. Not that he expected violence. Few species were stupid enough to attack representatives of galactic civilization, but protocol was protocol. The first thing that struck him as he stepped onto Earth's surface was the air. It was cleaner than he had expected, rich with oxygen and carrying scents that spoke of a world still in balance with its natural systems. The second thing was the delegation waiting for him. He had expected a small group of nervous primitives, perhaps with crude protective equipment and obvious weapons nearby for their psychological comfort. Instead, he found himself facing a dozen humans in simple but elegant clothing, standing with the kind of relaxed confidence he usually associated with advanced civilizations. The woman at the center of the group stepped forward, and Zethkar was surprised to note that she showed no signs of fear or awe. Her expression was alert, curious, and professionally courteous, exactly what he might have expected from a council diplomat meeting a new species for the first time. "Ambassador Zethkar," she said, and he was impressed that she pronounced his name correctly on the first attempt. "I'm Secretary General Martinez, representing the United Nations of Earth. Welcome to our world." Zethkar inclined his head in the formal diplomatic gesture of acknowledgement. "Secretary General Martinez, I am honored by your welcome. I come as a representative of the Galactic Council, speaking for thousands of worlds and millions of species who have joined together in peaceful cooperation." "We're honored by your visit," Martinez replied. "We've prepared a conference facility where we can speak privately. I hope you'll find our accommodations acceptable." As they walked toward the building complex, Zethkar found himself studying the humans more closely. They moved with the kind of coordinated efficiency he associated with military training, but their manner was entirely civilian. They asked intelligent questions about his ship, his species, and the Council itself, demonstrating a breadth of knowledge that suggested extensive preparation in the few hours since first contact. The conference room they entered was spacious, but not ostentatious, with large windows that provided a view of the surrounding landscape. The humans had arranged seating for both species, with additional space for the demonstration equipment he had brought. Everything spoke of careful planning and diplomatic experience. "Before we begin formal discussions," Secretary General Martinez said as they took their seats, "I should mention that representatives from every major nation on Earth are participating in this meeting through secure communication links. While I'm speaking for humanity as a whole, I want you to know that we've achieved unprecedented global cooperation for this historic moment." Zethkar nodded this information with professional interest. Most primitive species had one or two dominant leaders he could work through. Global cooperation was unusual but not impossible to manage. He activated his demonstration display, filling the space above the conference table with a three-dimensional representation of local space. "Secretary General," he began, settling into the familiar rhythm of first contact protocols, "I suspect that your species believes itself to be alone in the universe. I'm here to inform you that this is not the case. What you see before you is a representation of this region of the galaxy, showing the locations of civilizations that have joined the Galactic Council. Hundreds of points of light appeared in the display, each representing a world that had accepted Council membership." He watched the human faces around the table, expecting to see the usual mixture of awe and fear that came with the revelation of galactic civilization's scope. Instead, he saw focused attention and professional interest. Several of the humans were taking notes. One was quietly asking questions of colleagues through what appeared to be a communication device. None looked particularly surprised or overwhelmed. "Impressive," Secretary General Martinez said. What is the selection criteria for council membership? The question caught Zefkar off guard. Most primitive species asked about the aliens themselves, or whether Earth was in danger, or whether they were being invaded. Questions about membership criteria suggested a level of political sophistication he hadn't expected. The Council seeks to guide younger civilizations towards peaceful development and mutual prosperity, he explained. We offer protection, advanced technology, and access to galactic trade networks. In exchange, we ask for cooperation with Council policies and contributions to our collective security. And if a civilization chooses not to join? Another unexpected question. Usually, primitive species didn't think to ask about alternatives until after the benefits had been explained. Such cases are rare, Secretary General. Most civilizations recognize the benefits of membership once they understand the scope of galactic civilization and the dangers of remaining isolated. But theoretically, a civilization could choose independence? Zefkar felt the first hint of unease. This conversation wasn't following the standard pattern. Theoretically, yes. However, the galaxy can be dangerous for unprotected worlds. The Council has a responsibility to ensure galactic peace and stability. He decided to move to the next phase of the standard presentation. The display changed, showing examples of Council technology, faster-than-light drives, planetary engineering, exotic matter manipulation. These demonstrations usually reduced primitive leaders to stunned silence as they contemplated the vast gulf between their technology and galactic civilization. The humans watched attentively, asked detailed questions about the physics involved, and made notes about potential applications. Several requested specifications, which Zefkar declined to provide pending Council membership. But again, none seemed overwhelmed or frightened by what they were seeing. Your technology is certainly impressive, Martinez said when the display concluded. What would Council membership mean for Earth specifically? Full integration into galactic society, Zefkar replied, beginning to feel that this first contact was proceeding strangely. Access to Council technology, protection from galactic threats, and representation in Council governance proportional to your world's contributions. And our current governmental systems? Would be replaced by Council-approved administrative structures naturally. Local customs and cultures are respected within the bounds of Council law, but planetary governance must be compatible with galactic stability. For the first time since the meeting began, Zefkar saw a significant emotional response from the humans. It wasn't fear or anger, but something he couldn't quite identify. Several of the humans exchanged glances, and their note-taking became more intensive. Ambassador, Secretary General Martinez said carefully, what you're describing sounds less like an alliance and more like annexation. I prefer to think of it as guided development, Zefkar replied, using the standard diplomatic phrasing. Primitive civilizations often lack the perspective necessary to make optimal decisions about their development. The Council provides that perspective. I see. And what happens to civilizations that decline this guidance? This was the moment Zefkar had been building toward. The moment when primitive species learned their true position in the galactic order. As I mentioned, such cases are rare. The galaxy can be dangerous, and unprotected worlds often face threats they cannot handle alone, such as hostile species, resource conflicts, technological disasters. The Council maintains defense forces to protect member worlds from such threats. Non-member worlds, unfortunately, cannot benefit from such protection. The room had grown very quiet. Zefkar could see the humans processing the implications of what he was telling them. This was usually when primitive leaders began asking about the specifics of membership, eager to avoid the fate of worlds that chose unwisely. Instead, Secretary General Martinez asked, how many non-member civilizations currently exist in Council space? Very few, Zefkar admitted. As I said, most worlds recognize the benefits. How many specifically? Something in her tone made Zefkar hesitate. I am not privy to exact census data, Secretary General. An estimate, then. Perhaps a dozen worlds maintain non-member status, though most are unsuitable for advanced civilization development. Unsuitable how? Zefkar was beginning to feel distinctly uncomfortable. Harsh environments, limited resources, isolated locations. Nothing like Earth, which is clearly suitable for full integration into galactic civilization. I see. Martinez looked around the table at her colleagues. Ambassador, I think we need to discuss your proposal among ourselves before providing a response. How long can you remain in our system? As long as necessary, Secretary General. However, I should mention that the Council has authorized me to complete these negotiations within a reasonable time frame. Extended delays could be problematic. Problematic how? The direct questions were becoming irritating. The Council has significant resources committed to this region, Secretary General. Fleet Admiral Kextor has positioned defense forces nearby in case Earth requires protection from hostile forces. Naturally, these resources cannot remain in position indefinitely. Zethkar watched the humans absorb this information. Finally, he saw the reaction he had been expecting. The moment when primitive species realized they were not being offered a choice, but an ultimatum. But instead of fear or immediate capitulation, what he saw looked remarkably like determination. Ambassador. Secretary General Martinez said with the kind of formal courtesy that usually preceded diplomatic disasters, "We appreciate your offer and the Council's interest in Earth. We will need 72 hours to formulate our response." "Of course. I will await your decision with interest." As the meeting concluded and Zethkar returned to his shuttle, he found himself puzzled by the entire encounter. The humans had been too calm, too prepared, too unimpressed by demonstrations that should have shocked them into submission. They had asked too many intelligent questions and shown too little of the awe he expected from primitive species. Most troubling of all, when faced with the implicit threat of Council military intervention, they had not begged for protection or demanded guarantees of safety. They had simply requested time to think about it. In his 3 centuries of diplomatic experience, Zethkar had never encountered a primitive species that needed to think about whether they wanted to survive. As the shuttle rose through Earth's atmosphere toward the waiting harbinger, he found himself wondering what exactly these humans were planning to think about. He was about to find out. 72 hours after the initial meeting, Ambassador Zethkar stood again in the conference room. But everything had changed. The humans had used their time well. Too well. Where before there had been a dozen representatives, now the room held 3 times that number, including several individuals whose bearing suggested military backgrounds, despite their civilian clothing. Secretary General Martinez rose as he entered, but her demeanor had shifted from diplomatic courtesy to something that reminded Zethkar uncomfortably of the way apex predators regarded potential threats. "Ambassador," she said, "thank you for your patience. We've had extensive discussions about the Council's offer, and we're ready to provide our response." Zethkar took his seat, noting that the humans had rearranged the furniture subtly. Before, he had been positioned as the focal point of attention. Now, the seating suggested a negotiation between equals. Professional diplomat that he was, he recognized the psychological implications immediately. "We appreciate the time you've taken to consider the Council's generous offer," he began, falling back on standard diplomatic language. "I trust you've reached the logical conclusion regarding Earth's future." "Oh, we've definitely reached some conclusions," Martinez replied. "But first we have some additional questions about the Galactic Council and its operations." Zethkar felt a flicker of annoyance. "More questions." "Certainly, Secretary General. I'm here to help you understand the benefits of membership. Actually, our questions are more about the Council's history. Specifically, we'd like to know about the Veltar Confederation."
The words hit Zethkar like a physical blow.
He managed to keep his expression neutral, but inwardly he reeled. The Veltar Confederation was classified information, buried in Council archives that required the highest levels of clearance to access. How could these primitives possibly know about... "I'm not familiar with that designation," he lied smoothly. "Really?" One of the new humans spoke up, a woman with silver hair and the kind of intense focus that suggested a background in intelligence work. "Because we've spent the last 3 days analyzing the electromagnetic emissions from your ship. Quite sophisticated for a diplomatic vessel. In fact, your quantum resonance patterns match those detected in the Veltar system approximately 400 years ago, just before all radio transmissions from that region ceased permanently." Zethkar's forehands clenched involuntarily. "I'm afraid I don't understand your meaning." "The Veltar system," another human continued, this one clearly military despite his civilian attire, contained 7 inhabited worlds with a total population of approximately 12 billion sentients. They had achieved interplanetary travel and were working on faster-than-light technology. Then, one day, all transmissions stopped. When our deep space telescopes examined the system more recently, we found something interesting. The conference room's main display activated, showing astronomical images that made Zethkar's blood freeze. There, in perfect clarity, were the shattered remnants of the Veltar system. 7 dead worlds, their surfaces turned to glass by planet-cracking weapons. The evidence of the Council's final solution to a species that had refused integration. 7 planets, the human continued relentlessly. Reduced to molten slag. Very precise work. Very efficient. Very thorough. The kind of operation that requires significant technological superiority and considerable experience in planetary destruction. This is impossible, Zethka stammered. Your technology cannot possibly detect events at such distances, cannot possibly analyze quantum signatures across interstellar space. Oh, but Ambassador, Secretary General Martinez interrupted, and now her smile was sharp enough to cut metal. You're forgetting something important about humans. Which is, we're really good at figuring things out. The display changed again, and Zethkar found himself looking at technical schematics that should not have existed. Detailed analyses of Council technology, extrapolations of defensive capabilities, theoretical models of galactic political structures. In 72 hours, these primitives had reverse-engineered enough Council science to build a remarkably accurate picture of galactic civilization. You see, Ambassador, when you showed us your pretty displays of Council technology, you made a critical error. You assumed we were too primitive to understand what we were looking at. But humans have this peculiar habit of learning from everything we encounter. Your translator technology, for instance, provided us with fascinating insights into quantum consciousness interfaces. Your ship's stealth systems taught us quite a lot about exotic matter manipulation, and your casual mention of defense forces nearby led us to some very interesting discoveries. What discoveries? We found your fleet, Ambassador. The words fell into the room like stones into still water. Zethkar felt his respiratory systems falter as the full implications hit him. If the humans had detected the Council battle fleet positioned at the edge of their system, 47 ships, the military human continued conversationally, impressive firepower, enough to sterilize a planet's surface several times over. We were particularly interested in the flagship, Inevitable. Isn't it called? Quite appropriate, really. How? Zethkar whispered. Oh, the usual human approach, Martinez said. We asked ourselves what we would do if we were planning to exterminate a stubborn species. Where would we position our forces for maximum intimidation value? How would we coordinate a system-wide operation? What kind of surveillance would we establish? And then, another human picked up the thread. We started looking for exactly those things. Gravitational anomalies that suggest cloaked vessels, quantum flux patterns that indicate exotic matter drives, communication bursts that might represent fleet coordination. The kind of signatures that would be invisible to most primitive species but quite detectable to a species that spent the last century developing increasingly sophisticated ways to kill each other. Zethkar's mind raced desperately. This was impossible. No primitive species had ever detected a Council fleet. No primitive species had ever analyzed Council technology. No primitive species had ever... You're wondering how we did it, Martinez observed. How a species that's barely achieved nuclear technology could possibly unravel galactic-level science in 3 days. Would you like to know the secret, Ambassador? Zethkar nodded numbly. We didn't work alone. Martinez gestured to the display, which now showed a communication network spanning the entire planet. 8 billion humans, all connected through our global communication system. 8 billion minds working on the same problem simultaneously. Physicists and engineers and computer scientists and mathematicians, all sharing data in real time, all building on each other's discoveries. Your scientists achieved in 3 days what took our species centuries to discover, another human added. Because we didn't have to discover it, we had samples. Your ship provided us with working examples of technologies we could analyze, reverse engineer, and improve upon. Improve upon? Zethkar's voice came out as a croak. Oh yes. The human smile was genuinely enthusiastic now. Your quantum consciousness interface is elegant, but inefficient. We've developed a version that's approximately 40% more effective. Your exotic matter manipulation creates unnecessary quantum instabilities that we've learned to avoid. And your faster-than-light drive design has some interesting vulnerabilities that we've been exploring. The room spun around Zethkar. Vulnerabilities? Well, the quantum field harmonics that allow your ships to exceed light speed also create specific resonance frequencies that can be disrupted with appropriately tuned gravitational waves. Disable the quantum field harmonic, and faster-than-light travel becomes impossible. Trap a ship in normal space where conventional physics apply. You're bluffing, Zethkar said desperately. Your technology cannot possibly. The room's lights dimmed as every electronic device activated simultaneously. The air itself seemed to hum with barely contained energy. Through the windows, Zethkar could see streams of light rising from installations across the Earth's surface. Weapons emplacements that hadn't existed 3 days ago, built with impossible speed using principles these primitives had no right to understand. Ambassador, Secretary General Martinez said quietly. "You should know that 47 minutes ago, every ship in your fleet simultaneously lost faster-than-light capability. They're currently trapped in normal space at the edge of our solar system, unable to escape and unable to advance without our permission." Additionally, the military human added, "We've established what you might call defensive installations throughout the system. Nothing fancy, just some applications of the physics principles we learned from studying your technology. We're particularly proud of our gravitational wave generators. They can create spatial distortions that would make even your planet-cracking weapons rather ineffective." Zethkar's world collapsed around him. "This is impossible. Your species is primitive. You have no understanding of galactic-level technology. You cannot possibly—" "Ambassador," Martinez interrupted gently. "You keep using that word, primitive. I'm beginning to think it doesn't mean what you think it means." She gestured to the display again, which now showed a real-time image of the Council fleet, dead in space at the system's edge. 47 ships that had never been detected by a primitive species, now clearly visible and helplessly stranded. "You see," Martinez continued, "humans have a saying. Necessity is the mother of invention. When you threaten us with extinction, you provide us with considerable necessity. And when you provide us with samples of the technology we need to defend ourselves, you give us the tools to invent solutions. It's how we approach problems. Your species seems to have developed a rigid hierarchy. Standard protocols, predictable responses, very efficient for managing a stable civilization, very vulnerable to a species that specializes in adaptation and improvisation." "You want to know why we've never learned to quit, Ambassador?" Martinez asked. "Because the universe has been trying to kill us since the day we crawled out of our caves. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, plagues, famines, wars, disasters of every conceivable kind. And somehow, we're still here. Still growing, still learning, still refusing to accept that anything is impossible." The display changed one final time, showing a schematic that made Zethkar's blood freeze. It was a detailed technical analysis of Council ship design, complete with tactical assessments and strategic recommendations. "So here's our response to the Council's generous offer," Martinez said. "We decline membership. We choose independence. And if the Council has a problem with that choice, they're welcome to discuss it with us. But they should know that we've spent the last 3 days learning how to fight galactic-level wars. And we've gotten very good at it very quickly." "This is madness," Zethkar whispered. "You cannot fight the Council. You cannot defeat galactic civilization. You're one primitive world against thousands of advanced species. Ambassador," Martinez said. And now her voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who had seen the impossible become routine. "You still don't understand what you're dealing with. We're not trying to defeat galactic civilization. We're offering it a choice." "What choice?" "Learn to coexist with a species that refuses to be conquered, or learn why humanity has never lost a war we were determined to win." The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of technological power that seemed to emanate from the Earth itself. Zethkar sat in stunned disbelief, trying to process the complete reversal of everything he thought he knew about primitive species. "We'll escort your fleet safely out of our system," Martinez added conversationally. "No damage, no hostilities, no threats. We're not interested in conquest or revenge." "But Ambassador, you need to understand something very clearly." "What?" "This is our world. These are our rules. And anyone who doesn't like those rules is cordially invited to try changing them." As Zethkar was escorted back to his shuttle, his mind reeling from the complete failure of everything he thought he understood about galactic politics, he found himself wondering how he was going to explain this to the Council. How do you tell a civilization that has ruled the galaxy for 15,000 years that they've just met their first equals? How do you explain that humanity's greatest strength isn't their technology, or their weapons, or their numbers, but their absolute refusal to accept that anything is impossible? How do you report that Earth isn't a primitive world ready for conquest, but a fortress inhabited by the kind of species that turns threats into opportunities and impossibilities into engineering projects? As the shuttle rose toward the Harbinger, Ambassador Zethkar realized he was about to deliver the most important report in galactic history, and he wasn't sure anyone would believe him. 3 months had passed since the Harbinger and the Council fleet had departed the Sol system under human escort, but Ambassador Zethkar still couldn't sleep. He stood in his private quarters aboard the Council flagship Dominion, staring out at the swirl of stars beyond, his 4 hands pressed against the transparent aluminum viewport. Behind him, the small human music device sat on his desk, the gift that Secretary General Martinez had insisted he take as a Cultural exchange. He hadn't touched it since returning to Council space. He wasn't sure he was ready for whatever message humanity had encoded in their art. The door chimed softly, and Sub-Ambassador Velnash entered, carrying a data pad and wearing the kind of carefully neutral expression that indicated bad news. "Ambassador," she said quietly, "the High Council has completed their review of your report. They're ready to see you." Zefkar nodded without turning from the window. "How many believe it?" "Fewer than you might hope. More than you might fear." It was a diplomatic answer which told Zefkar everything he needed to know. The High Council was divided, confused, and probably more than a little frightened. In 15,000 years of galactic expansion, they had never received a report like his. "Any word from the reconnaissance missions?" Velnash hesitated. "The long-range survey teams have confirmed the presence of gravitational anomalies throughout the Sol system, artificial constructions of enormous scale, built with technology that appears to exceed our current understanding of exotic matter manipulation." "How many installations?" "Conservative estimates suggest several thousand, but Ambassador, that's not the disturbing part." Zefkar finally turned from the window. "What's the disturbing part?" "They're still building. Our quantum sensors can detect new construction beginning almost daily. In 3 months, the humans have transformed their solar system into something that our analysts describe as a fortress beyond our ability to assault." Zefkar closed his 4 eyes and tried to massage away the headache that had been constant since leaving Earth. "Any sign of expansion beyond their system?" "None. Whatever the humans are building, they seem content to keep it within their own borders. No faster-than-light signatures, no exploration vessels, no attempt to claim territory beyond Sol." "At least that's something," Zefkar muttered. "Ambassador," Velnash said carefully, "there's something else. We've been monitoring their communications. The humans have been talking." "About what?" "About us. About the Council. About galactic civilization in general." She paused. "They've been very thorough in their research." Zefkar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. "Show me." The datapad activated, displaying intercepted human transmissions. Zefkar read with growing horror as he saw detailed analyses of Council history, accurate assessments of galactic political structures, and frighteningly precise evaluations of various member species, technological and military capabilities. "How are they getting this information?" he asked. "We're not entirely certain. But, Ambassador, they seem to have developed a remarkable ability to extrapolate vast amounts of data from very small samples. Every piece of technology we showed them, every casual comment about Council operations, every detail we thought was harmless, they've used it all to build a comprehensive picture of galactic civilization. And their conclusions?" Velnash's expression grew troubled. "They appear to view the Council as a stagnant empire maintained through the threat of force against primitive species. Their analysis suggests that we haven't faced genuine opposition in so long that our military and technological development has essentially stopped." "That's absurd," Zefkar said automatically, then stopped. "Was it? When was the last time the Council had faced a real challenge? When was the last time they had been forced to innovate rather than simply apply overwhelming superiority?" "There's more, Ambassador. They've been sharing." "Sharing what?" "Information. Technical specifications, scientific discoveries." The humans appeared to be broadcasting detailed instructions for defensive technologies across multiple star systems. "They're teaching anyone who's listening how to resist Council expansion." The datapad showed transmission logs that made Zefkar's blood freeze. Thousands of signals broadcast to every corner of Council space, containing blueprints for gravitational wave generators, instructions for disrupting faster-than-light drives, and tactical analyses of Council military doctrines. Who are they transmitting to? Everyone, Ambassador. Member worlds, non-aligned systems, isolated colonies, even the restricted zones. They're providing defensive technology to anyone willing to listen. Zefkar sat heavily in his chair, overwhelmed by the implications. How many are listening? Early reports suggest significant response from non-aligned systems. Several former Council worlds have ceased communication with our administrative centers. And Ambassador, Velnash hesitated again. What? We've lost contact with the Kepler Station monitoring post. Last transmission indicated they had detected unusual gravitational anomalies before all communication ceased. Kepler Station was one of the Council's most important monitoring facilities, positioned to observe a cluster of developing civilizations. If it had been neutralized, the humans? Unknown. but the gravitational signatures matched those observed around human installations. Zethkar realized he was gripping the arms of his chair hard enough to leave impressions in the metal. How long until the High Council meeting? 30 minutes, Ambassador. Time enough to prepare for the end of the galaxy as we know it, Zethkar muttered. The High Council chamber had never felt so tense. Representatives from 1,000 worlds filled the tiered seats, but instead of the usual confident hum of galactic authority, the air crackled with uncertainty and barely suppressed fear. High Councillor Draeneth's crystalline form flickered with agitated colors as she called the session to order. Ambassador Zethkar, the Council has reviewed your report regarding the species known as humans. Your conclusions are difficult to accept. Zethkar stood at the central podium, acutely aware that every being in the chamber was staring at him with expressions ranging from skepticism to outright disbelief. High Councillor, I understand the Council's reluctance to believe my findings. 3 months ago, I would have found them impossible myself. You claim, interrupted Councillor Vextul of the Vortak Empire, that a single primitive world not only resisted Council integration but actively threatened our entire fleet. This is beyond improbable. It is fantasy.
I claim nothing, Counselor.
I report what I observed. Zethkar activated the holographic display, showing the technical specifications the humans had provided as proof of concept. These are not fabrications or theories. These are working technologies that disabled our fastest ships and neutralized our most advanced weapons. Impossible, declared Councillor Quintha, her insectoid features clicking with agitation. No primitive species could achieve such advances in mere days. Our own scientists require centuries to develop comparable technologies.
With respect, Counselor, I believe that is exactly the problem.
Zethkar changed the display to show comparative development curves. Our civilization has grown comfortable with gradual, predictable progress. We have forgotten what innovation looks like when driven by desperation and necessity. You speak of humans as if they were some sort of superior species, growled Fleet Admiral Kexthor from his position among the military observers. They are primitives with crude nuclear weapons and chemical rockets. My forces could reduce their world to slag in hours. Could they, Admiral? Zethkar asked quietly. Because 3 months ago, you commanded the most powerful fleet ever assembled by the Council. 47 of our finest warships, equipped with planet-cracking weapons, and manned by our most experienced crews. And a single primitive world neutralized that entire fleet without firing a shot. The chamber erupted in arguments, denials, and demands for proof. Zethkar waited for the noise to subside, then activated a new section of his display. The humans provided me with this analysis of our encounter, he said. They call it a tactical post-mortem. I suggest the Council review it carefully. The hologram showed a detailed breakdown of the engagement viewed from the human perspective. Every Council ship's position, every weapons system, every defensive capability, all precisely catalogued and counted with technologies the humans had developed in real time. This analysis is more thorough than our own military assessments. Admiral Kexthor admitted grudgingly. How did they acquire such detailed intelligence? They observed, Admiral. They learned. They adapted. In 3 days, they went from detecting our presence to understanding our capabilities to developing countermeasures that rendered our entire fleet helpless. But why? High Councillor Draeneth asked. If they possess such capabilities, why haven't they expanded? Why haven't they attacked Council territories? Why do they remain in their single system? Zethkar had been wondering the same thing for months. Because, High Councillor, I believe they don't want to conquer the galaxy. They simply want to be left alone. Preposterous! Councillor Vextul snarled. All intelligent species seek to expand their influence, to control resources, to dominate potential threats. Do they? Zethkar asked. Or is that simply how we think because it's all we've ever known? He activated the final section of his presentation, the intercepts of human communications that Velnash had shown him. These are human transmissions from the past 3 months, he said. Note what they are not doing. They are not building invasion fleets. They are not claiming territory. They are not demanding tribute or submission from other species. What are they doing? Someone called from the upper tiers. They're teaching, Zethkar replied. They're sharing defensive technologies with anyone who wants them. They're broadcasting scientific discoveries that could benefit every species in the galaxy. They're offering assistance to worlds that want to resist Council integration, but they're also offering friendship to worlds that choose to remain members.
You make them sound like saviors, Councillor Quintha said suspiciously.
No, Zethkar said quietly. I make them sound like what they are, a species that values freedom over security, independence over protection, and the right to choose over the certainty of survival. The chamber fell silent as the implications settled over them. For 15,000 years, the Council had maintained galactic peace through superior force and the promise of protection. The idea of a species that would choose dangerous freedom over safe submission was literally incomprehensible to most of them. What do you recommend, Ambassador? High Counselor Draneth asked finally. Zethkar took a deep breath. I recommend that the Council formally recognize human independence and establish diplomatic relations with Earth. I recommend that we treat them as equals rather than subjects. And I recommend that we prepare for the possibility that the galaxy is about to change in ways we never imagined. And if we refuse? Admiral Kextor asked. Then I believe we will discover what happens when an unstoppable force meets an unmovable object, Zethkar replied. And Admiral, I'm no longer certain which one we are. Later, as the Council debated humanity's fate and the future of galactic civilization, Zethkar returned to his quarters and finally picked up the human music device. With hands that trembled slightly, he activated it and listened to the first song. It was something called metal music, as Secretary General Martinez had promised. The sound was raw, powerful, and filled with a defiant energy that seemed to embody everything he had learned about humanity. But it was the lyrics that made him understand why the humans had given this to him. The song spoke of standing against impossible odds, of refusing to surrender in the face of overwhelming force, of finding strength in the very act of resistance itself. It was a message from one species to another, delivered through the universal language of art. As the music played, Ambassador Zethkar finally understood what he had tried to explain to the Council. Humanity wasn't dangerous because of their technology or their weapons or their ability to adapt. They were dangerous because they had created an entire civilization based on the idea that freedom was worth any risk, any sacrifice, any cost. They were dangerous because they had looked at the vast hostile universe and decided that they would make their own rules about what was possible. And they were dangerous because, for the first time in 15,000 years, they had shown the galaxy what it looked like when someone refused to be conquered. The music continued to play as Zethkar stared out at the stars, wondering if he was witnessing the end of the old galactic order or the beginning of something entirely new. Outside his window, space itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what humanity would do next. And in a small blue world in the Orion Arm, 8 billion humans continued the work they had always done, taking the impossible and making it routine, one discovery at a time.